Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and hi if you're new here, I'm Jade, and it is time for January's wrap-up. So it is the first wrap-up of 2026, which is super exciting. I have to say, I read slightly less than I usually would, but that's because I was away visiting my family back in the UK, so obviously I wasn't going to just like sit around reading the whole time. So I was mainly reading just like a little bit before bed and things, so it was a little bit of a slower pace this month, but I still got 7 books read, although one or two of them were quite short, and this is the first video I am filming since getting back, and so I am a little bit of a jet-lagged mess, I'm not gonna lie, and I've got a lot to do for my business, but I was like, I need to stop and tell you what I think about the books I read this month. So because of traveling, a lot of my reads are actually on my Kindle this month, so I will display the covers when I'm talking about them. And the first one was a gifted book that I got, so it is already out, it's not an ARC, but the author asked me to read and review it for him, which I agreed, so that's what we're talking about first. And that book is called Toy Soldiers of Monsters and Men, Volume 1 by D.D. Ward. So I guess this book is like a sci-fi military thriller. I definitely haven't read anything similar to this, and I'm quite new to sci-fi. Like, I loved Project Hail Mary last year and things that sort of touch on sci-fi, but I must say this was probably like the most sort of sci-fi thriller that I've read in a while, and I definitely haven't read anything like this before. So this novel is set in the 80s, and what has happened is the government have created these sort of like massive, bigger, larger than life people known as Titans, but they have gone rogue. So these Titans were created to have this sort of superhero type strength, and because they've gone rogue, there's now a kind of like huge crisis, like world crisis because of this, and the countries need to come together and work together in order to be able to stop the Titans. The beginning of the book hooked me in really quickly because it was about a woman running away from these men that seemingly wanted to attack her, and then something mysterious seemed to come out and save her. However, as the plot moved forward, I found the middle quite slow, so I found this really hard to rate because I do think that I'm maybe not the typical audience for the book. I have to start by saying it was written so well. Like, his writing is amazing. Like, it just flowed well, it sounded great. It's just, for me, the plot didn't move fast enough. So understandably, being that it has negotiations between countries trying to solve a crisis, there's a lot of like political intrigue in there and a lot of conversations between the characters, and quite a lot of characters. I think I just wanted a little bit more action throughout the novel, and also for me, because there were so many characters, even though I could follow it easy enough, I never really got to know them enough to really care what happened to them, in my opinion. However, as I got toward the end of the book, it was really good. Like, the last part of the book had me gripped in there. The action was right there. It was amazing. But for me, there was just too much of a slow part in the middle, which is why I decided on a 3.5 star rating, because I would put the end and the beginning at like 5 star, but the middle lower, a lot lower for me. So I just went with 3.5 as a kind of like in between rating. I think if this is your more usual kind of genre though, like if you enjoy reading about political intrigue and sort of like a sort of thriller mystery crisis novel, I think you will enjoy this. I just don't know if I was definitely really the right audience for this one. And I also think it was the style that I struggled with a little bit. I'm not the biggest fan of long chapters, and this book was like 500 pages long, and there was only 7 chapters, so you can imagine they're quite long. And I think I am often that person that will pick up a book when I get a spare 10 minutes here and there and quickly read a chapter, you know, like in between clients, things like that. And obviously this didn't really allow that very well for me, so I do think that for me personally, the structure just wasn't what really suits me. But if you don't mind your longer chapters, again, I do think this is quite a good one if this sounds like your kind of topic. And then the second book that I read this month was Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughy. I actually rated this 5 stars when I first finished it, but I did swap it down to 4.75 the next day after just having a few thoughts about it. But let me tell you about the plot first. So this book begins with a body being washed up on a shore of this little island, and then we find out that only one family resides on this island now, that it's basically isolated, and we find out that over time it's going to be going underwater, so eventually they need to leave as well. This island was used for storing rare seeds, and this family were living there as the father was part of like the mission to save these seeds. And then they all rescue this person that has got washed up on shore, But then there's a lot of suspicion on both sides of each other. So the person that washed up on shore is very suspicious of the family, and the family are very suspicious of her. And essentially, it's about uncovering a lot of secrets. I can't really say more than that. That's kind of the plot without giving too much away. But honestly, what I loved about this book was the sort of like delicate and beautiful way, nature and the theme of nature was treated and described. It just shows such a love of nature from the characters. And I love that because I feel like that is quite neglected in the modern world, honestly. And I am a huge nature lover. I love being out in nature, and so I really like that side of the book. It also deals with the themes of loss and isolation, and I think it does it really well. So yeah, it's kind of like just a general literary fiction. And the only reason I moved it to 4.75 is I did see a little bit of the plot coming, and therefore I thought, you know what? I think I just want to move it down that little bit, but it was a really good read. It captured me from the beginning. But this was actually a book club pick for my in-person book club, even though I couldn't make it this month because I was traveling. But I thought I would still read it so that, I could join in with it because I had heard good things about this. I'd seen it in the Goodreads sort of like finals. So yeah, I just thought it'd be worth me picking up and reading, and I'm so glad I did. Okay, the next book I read was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This was from last month's TBR jar, and I ran out of time. I didn't get to read it in December, so I moved it to January, and I'm so glad I did because I loved it. I thought January was the perfect time to catch up with it because I didn't make a TBR for myself this month, knowing that I was traveling. I just knew that I wouldn't have that much time, but luckily I did have time to squeeze this in. So this is a typical Emily Henry cheesy romance novel, sort of rom-com vibe novel, but I honestly love this one, because obviously the characters love books. It's called Book Lovers, and they sort of work in the publishing industry. And what I found really refreshing about this one is that it's written from a singular perspective. I have nothing against a dual narrative or a multiple perspective, but I do feel like more and more and more books are doing it these days. That used to be like a kind of cool thing that some books would have, but now it feels like nearly every book, especially in romance, that I pick up always has to have that dual perspective, and I just found it kind of refreshing going back to the singular perspective. So in this book we follow Nora, and she is a sort of literary agent, and her sister is a huge fan of one of her clients, and her client wrote about a place called Sunshine Falls. So as this Sunshine Falls place was mentioned in one of the novels, Nora's sister wants to go there, and she books for them both to visit this tiny little village of Sunshine Falls. So it's very small town vibes, everyone knows each other, there's not a lot there, it's very cutesy kind of sounding, and they head off there not long after Nora has had a meeting with another literary employee called Charlie. And Charlie turns down the manuscript for a book that she proposes to him. So she doesn't have the best view of Charlie. She thinks he's quite rude. And as you can imagine, when they go to Sunshine Falls, maybe Charlie is there. So it's an enemies to lovers novel, but it also has a little bit more to it, which I really enjoyed. There's a lot about sort of family dynamics and family responsibilities and things like that. And I enjoyed having those other aspects to the plot. So yeah, I just thought it was a really perfect, cute little romance. It does everything you expect out of a cheesy romance novel. So I felt like it deserves its 5 stars because I can't really think of anything specifically for this book that I would change to make it any better. Okay, so the 4th book I read was the first one on my Kindle as I was traveling. I mainly read this when I was actually like on the airplane and stuff on the way over to the UK. So I had a bit of time. This wasn't the longest book, so I did get through this one quite quickly. And it's called A Very Unusual Jade, a Nerdy Paranormal Romance. So yes, it's a paranormal romance by Rashell, Rozet. Basically, we follow a girl called Jade who is back in her hometown. And it seems Jade has a bit of a gift for sort of like detecting weird vibes from people, I guess you could say. And she kind of senses that the newcomer in town is not actually human. She gets these really bad vibes and she just kind of knows that. And essentially, she needs to sort of embrace her abilities so that she can save the town. As well as that, there's also a sort of romance plot with her ex-friend. And there's a little bit about family dynamics and friendships. As you can tell, though, I give it 2 stars. I wasn't the biggest fan, honestly. The beginning of the plot, like just nothing really happened. And then everything happened in the last like 50 pages of the book. I think if the pacing was sorted, I don't think the actual like story premise is bad, but it was just the way it was executed. It was just really slow, and the writing just felt honestly a little bit juvenile. I just felt like the writing had a very young voice. It kind of felt like something that I would have wrote in high school, but I do like the plot and I think it could have had potential, but it just didn't work for me. Then the next book I read, which I read quite slowly because it's quite long, is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So in this book, we follow Poppy, who is the maiden. Essentially, she's like a chosen one. She is to be ascended, but it's like important that she sort of stays pure. But obviously, being the maiden kind of creates her to be a target, and we learn of this sort of person called the Dark One, who they say is out to get her. And the story is essentially kind of like a bit of a war between two worlds about attempts to capture Poppy. So we're kind of following her and her guards and like trying to keep her safe. I think it falls under the dark fantasy genre. I don't know if I'd put it as really dark. That often to me means there's a lot of smut in it, and honestly, like, there was a little bit, but I didn't think it was that smut heavy, like no more than like forthwing or anything. I must say I struggled rating this because I was really absorbed into this book. I really enjoyed reading it, and obviously 4 stars. Yes, love the book. The reason I can't rate it higher, well, there's 2 reasons. The first reason, I totally saw the twist coming a long way off. Like I just kind of knew. The second reason is I just found the ending quite abrupt. Like I felt like we really got into it and it was suddenly like, oh, this stuff's happening. End of book. I get it. I have to move on to book 2. But it just felt a little bit imbalanced in that there was just so much action right at the end and then it just ended. I think from like a second book in a series, I would maybe expect that a little bit more. But I think because it's the first book, it just left it so open that I just felt like it could have done with a bit more. But I did really enjoy it, as I said, and I definitely will be continuing the series. I know that I'm supposed to like jump between books of series of Jennifer L. Armentrout. If any of you have read her books, let me know what the best reading order is so that I know, but I will slowly work my way through it, I think. And then the 6th book I read on the plane back from the UK, which is another quite short novel, and it's called Death on the Bookshelf by Poppy Bridgeman. So this book we follow Ginny, who is an American who has just inherited her late aunt's bookstore in the United Kingdom in Devon, so quite countryside for those that don't know. It's a very small town vibe type novel again. Everyone sort of knows everyone and everyone's all in everyone's business. However, Ginny's biggest problem isn't trying to learn how to run a bookstore in a foreign country. Her biggest problem turns up when someone gets murdered inside the bookstore. It seems that this person was trying to find something specific, and as they investigate, more and more things unravel, and it sort of goes on from there. I don't want to say too much more because it's just like a cozy murder mystery story. There's not like anything unique or special about it per se, but I think it makes for a good read. It kind of reminds me of, TV shows like Midsummer Murders, Miss Marple, that kind of thing. Just like these like small little investigations. It's very cute. It's very cozy. So I think it makes like a quite nice, quick, easy read. I gave it 3.75 because I don't feel like it's going to be like super memorable or anything like that for me, but it was perfectly enjoyable. So if you like your sort of cozy murder mysteries, definitely pick this one up. And then the final book I read in January was Beartown by Fredrik. I have wanted to read this book for so long. Ever since I read Anxious People last summer, I was really eager to pick up another Fredrik book. As this one is set around ice hockey, I just felt like winter. It just had winter vibes, so I was saving it for the winter time. So I'm glad I've picked it up around now. In all honesty, I was expecting it to be a 5-star read, but I had to go with 4.5 because I found the beginning a little slow. So essentially, this story follows Beartown, the whole town of Beartown, and several people that live within that town, and their love of hockey and how important their hockey teams are to them. The reason the beginning was slow for me is it was so hockey focused, and I'm not a sports person at all, and I just found it a little bit like, oh, we're just still talking about hockey, going on about hockey. Like, there wasn't that much happening. I get that it was to introduce the characters and show just how obsessed this town was around hockey and how that can sort of affect their behavior, especially later on in the novel, but it was just slow for me because it was just so sports focused. However, by the time I was probably just under halfway through, the plot really starts to build, more things come in, and therefore I started to really enjoy it. I love Fredrik Backman's writing style. I don't feel like anyone else could write a book with this much hockey in it, and I would love it as much if it wasn't Fredrik Backman. His writing is just so clever. There's so many uses of, stereotypes and slightly off the wall, uncomfortable jokes, but used in such an effective way that I think it's great. It's not uncomfortable in the sense that I feel he shouldn't have written them. They're uncomfortable in the sense that they're supposed to make you feel a little uneasy about certain characters, I suppose. But essentially, someone in the hockey team does something to someone else. I don't want to give this away because I just think Otherwise, I am really giving you most of the plot. But essentially, it creates a divide in the town, and there's a lot of sort of like intrigue between people, a lot of suspicion, a lot of taking sides. Fredrik Backman's writing always sort of has social commentary, and this captures it so well. It just shows people's attitudes towards things, how blindsided they can get because of like a love for something. It explores mental health very deeply in this book through various ways and characters, and I think it's got some really important messages in there. So that's why I've gone with 4.5, because I do think the book has a lot of merit, a lot of importance, and the end for me was much more interesting. It's just it was a little slow to start, which is why I'm giving it 4.5, which feels really mean because the end of the book is so good, but I can't deny that I was bored for at least the first third of the book. And I think if I was a bit bored for the first third, it's not fair for me to give it 5 stars. Sorry. But yeah, that is everything I read in January. So as I said, a little bit of a shorter month, but I've still managed my way through 7 books, which I'm super happy with considering how busy I was. My work is picking up quite a lot, so I might be slightly lower on my book count this year than last year. We'll see how I keep up with it. I don't know. It just depends. But overall, I feel like I've had a good reading month. I've had a very mixed reading month in terms of reading different things, which I've really enjoyed actually. Like, it's been nice to dive into books that maybe I wouldn't have picked up as much if I wasn't so reliant on my Kindle, because a lot of those were ones that I'd sort of picked up for free on either like, Stuff Your Kindle days or things I'd been gifted from authors. So it gave me that chance to sort of read something a bit different, which was really nice. But anyway, if you've made it this far, please subscribe to my channel. I would love to make it to 100 of you very soon in 2026. I don't really do this for views. I do this for just fun because I love talking about books and I like to reflect on what I've been reading. It kind of gives me like that sort of motivation and enjoyment. I love watching people's wrap-ups and other book vlogs. So yeah, I just do this for enjoyment really, but please join me if you think you like some of the same books I do. Let me know what your best read of January was, and I will see you again real soon. Bye!